The early morning sun filtered through the windshield of the USPS delivery truck as the driver navigated the familiar streets of the quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped lazily on power lines, and the scent of freshly cut grass wafted in from the lawns he passed. It was just another day, or so he thought. He had been on this route for years and could almost complete it with his eyes closed. As he reached for the next package in his stack, his hand paused midair. Something was different. A bright yellow sticky note was affixed to the brown box, standing out starkly against the cardboard. Its hurried handwriting caught his eye immediately. He leaned in to read it. The note wasn't long, but it was impossible to ignore. In bold, slightly shaky letters, it said, "Please deliver ASAP, contains urgent medication." His eyes lingered on the word, urgent. Suddenly, the weight of the package seemed heavier. The air inside the truck felt a little more tense. He turned the box over in his hands, looking for the address, and quickly realized that it was for a house at the far end of his route, one he usually didn't get to until later in the afternoon. A quiet sense of urgency began to grow in his chest. He knew what that kind of message could mean. It wasn't just about mail anymore. Someone out there was depending on this delivery in a very real, possibly life-threatening way. In that moment, the routine of the day faded into the background. He wasn't just a postal worker with a list of addresses, he was a lifeline. The truck's engine hummed beneath him, but now it felt like a countdown. With a firm breath and a decisive nod, he slid the package to the front of the seat, making a silent promise to get it there as fast as he could. The note's message echoed in his mind as he read it again. "Please deliver ASAP, contains urgent medication," a simple plea written in rushed, slanted letters, as if the writer had been in a hurry or perhaps under stress. There were no exclamation marks, no elaborate explanation, just a direct, desperate appeal that struck him immediately. He stared at the words for a moment, feeling the weight of what they implied. This wasn't a casual request or a customer hoping to receive a package early out of impatience. This was something deeper. Someone needed this medication, and they needed it now. He had no idea what kind of medication it was, but the urgency was unmistakable. Maybe it was for a child, or an elderly person, or someone battling a serious condition. The possibilities raced through his mind, each more serious than the last. As a delivery driver, he saw thousands of packages every week: books, clothes, gadgets, toys. But this box was different. It didn't feel like just another stop. It felt like a mission. His hands tightened slightly around the corners of the box as he sat in his seat, staring out the windshield but not really seeing the road ahead. What if this package didn't make it in time? What if the person waiting for it was already on the edge of a medical crisis? The idea that his decision, when and how to deliver this single box, could impact someone's health or even survival sent a wave of responsibility through him. He couldn't ignore it. Not now. Not after reading that note. There was no signature, no detailed explanation, just trust. Someone had trusted him, a complete stranger, to recognize the importance of that message and act on it. And he knew, deep down, that he couldn't break that trust. It wasn't just his job on the line, it was someone's life, or at the very least their well-being. With renewed focus, he glanced once more at the note, then back at the road, already recalculating his route in his mind. He wouldn't let this package sit in the back of the truck for hours. He would make sure it got to the right hands, as quickly as possible. He flipped the package over and scanned the label, his eyes tracing the neatly printed address as his mind began to map it. The street name was familiar, very familiar, in fact. It belonged to a cul-de-sac tucked at the farthest edge of his delivery route, a quiet little lane he usually saved for last. That street, with its tall oaks and sleepy houses, was the final stop before he turned the truck back toward the post office each day. His usual system was efficient, carefully planned to maximize time and fuel, but today, that carefully built routine suddenly felt like a barrier. His finger hovered over the touchscreen of his route scanner, and he could already see the address near the bottom of the digital list, slotted well into the late afternoon. That would be hours from now. He imagined the person waiting inside that house, checking the front door repeatedly, perhaps pacing nervously, maybe even sitting by a phone, unsure if help would arrive in time. The thought made his stomach twist. The note hadn't come with instructions or phone numbers. It was a simple plea for speed, but it had carried more urgency than any email or system alert ever could. It wasn't about efficiency now, it was about empathy. He stared at the map again, eyes narrowing with a quiet resolve. The house wasn't too far if he adjusted things. If he shifted a few nearby deliveries and moved that stop up, he could get there within 20 minutes. It would throw off his usual order, maybe require a little backtracking later, but it was doable. More importantly, it was right. The decision felt clear, even if it meant explaining things later to a supervisor. He could deal with that. What he couldn't deal with was the idea of doing nothing, of driving past that opportunity to help someone who clearly didn't have the luxury of time. With a quiet sigh, he placed the package carefully on the passenger seat, a visual reminder of the priority it now held. The small box sat there like a quiet passenger, and he glanced at it again before shifting the truck into gear. The route would change, the schedule would shift, but the goal was now fixed in his mind. He had seen the note. He had read the address. And now he knew, without a doubt, that he had to act. Without wasting another second, he reached for the scanner and manually adjusted the delivery sequence. It wasn't something he normally did mid-route. There were protocols, expectations, and sometimes even metrics that tracked timing, but those concerns felt small now. With a few quick taps, he moved the urgent address to the top of the list, confirming the change with a firm press of his thumb. A soft beep acknowledged the update, and just like that, his day had shifted. He wasn't just running deliveries anymore, he was on a mission. As he settled back into his seat and buckled in, he glanced again at the small box sitting beside him. It wasn't large, barely the size of a shoebox, but its presence felt commanding, like it had taken on a weight far beyond its physical size. The urgency scribbled on that yellow note still echoed in his mind. He thought about the person who wrote it. How much trust and hope must have gone into that simple request. Rearranging his route wasn't just an option anymore. It was a necessity. He pulled away from the curb more quickly than usual, the engine humming a little louder as he made the turn that would take him in the opposite direction of his standard loop. Every stop he skipped was one more moment saved. A few houses he'd passed had familiar names and usual drop-offs, people expecting packages that would now arrive a bit later, but this delay felt justified. In his mind, this delivery now had a red siren flashing above it, invisible to everyone else, but impossible for him to ignore. As the minutes passed, he navigated intersections with sharp attention, eyes flicking between road signs and the small digital map on his scanner. He wasn't speeding, he couldn't risk that, but his movements had taken on a purpose and urgency he rarely felt. Every second counted now, and he refused to waste any. The traffic was light, a quiet gift from the morning, and for once, every green light seemed to be working in his favor. It was as if the universe understood what he was trying to do. Each turn brought him closer to the destination, and the silence inside the truck felt different now, not boring or routine, but focused. This was a moment that broke the rhythm of his day, reminded him that behind every package was a person, a story, a need. And this need was critical. He knew there might never be a thank you, never a name or face attached to this memory. But he didn't care. Rearranging his route had given him a sense of purpose stronger than any job description ever could. And he wasn't just delivering a box, he was delivering help, hope, and maybe even healing. He kept his eyes locked on the road as the truck moved smoothly through the winding streets, the hum of the engine barely masking the quickened beat of his heart. The scanner sat in its cradle, silently confirming that he was on the new path, but he didn't need it now. He knew this neighborhood well, each turn, each driveway, each familiar porch. But today, it all felt different. Every street sign he passed was a marker on a race he hadn't known he was running until just minutes ago. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, no cheering crowd, yet the sense of urgency was as real as if he were rushing someone to the hospital. The package remained in clear view, perched neatly on the passenger seat. He glanced at it every few seconds, as if to reassure himself it was still there. The yellow note fluttered slightly each time the truck hit a bump in the road, catching the corner of his eye like a persistent whisper, "Hurry." He wasn't reckless, he obeyed every stop sign, yielded when necessary, respected the quiet residential speed limits, but within those bounds, he moved like a man with purpose. Every slight delay, a red light, a slow car ahead, felt heavier than usual. He found himself gently gripping the wheel a bit tighter, his knuckles pale against the dark plastic. As he turned down a longer stretch of road bordered by towering trees, he checked the house numbers again. He was close now. Less than 5 minutes. He imagined the person inside that house, maybe checking the window, maybe anxiously waiting for the sound of a truck engine or the knock on the door. The image filled his chest with a strange combination of pressure and resolve. This was more than a job now. It felt like a responsibility that had been personally handed to him. The houses here were spaced farther apart, tucked behind bushes and garden fences, each one quiet and still in the late morning light. The world outside seemed calm, almost unaware of the silent urgency playing out inside his truck. But he was aware. Every foot forward was a small victory. He couldn't afford to stop. There were still a few turns left, a few driveways to pass, but he was getting closer, closer to doing what he knew in his heart was right. And as the final street came into view, he gently pressed the gas, silently promising the package, and whoever was waiting for it, that he wouldn't be a moment too late. As the truck eased around the final bend and into the quiet cul-de-sac, he spotted the house immediately. It was a modest, single-story home with pale blue siding and a white porch railing that had seen better days. A small garden sat just under the front window, with a few flowers beginning to bloom despite the early summer heat. The flag on the mailbox was lowered, and the driveway was empty, save for a small bird feeder swaying gently in the breeze. Everything about the scene looked peaceful, calm, almost too calm considering the tension that had been building inside him for the past 20 minutes. He slowed to a gentle stop in front of the house and reached over to retrieve the package. It felt even more delicate now, like it was carrying something far more fragile than medication, maybe hope, or relief. He stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching softly against the gravel driveway. The air was still, almost heavy with anticipation. As he climbed the short steps to the porch, he didn't have to knock. The door creaked open before he could raise his hand, as if the person inside had been standing just behind it, listening, waiting. An elderly woman stood there, her silver hair tied back in a loose bun, her eyes wide and wet with emotion. She wore a thin housecoat over a faded dress, and her hands trembled slightly as they reached for the box. "You came," she whispered, her voice quivering with both surprise and immense gratitude. "I didn't think you'd come this early." He offered her a gentle nod and handed over the package, careful not to let his own voice crack under the weight of the moment. "I saw the note," he said simply. "I knew it was important." She clutched the box to her chest like it was something sacred, her fingers curling tightly around the edges. Tears began to well in her eyes, and for a second, she seemed too overcome to speak. Then, with a shaky breath, she managed, "I was almost out. I didn't know what I'd do if it didn't come today." He didn't say anything right away. What could he say? The moment didn't need more words. Just his presence there, on that porch, with that small package, was enough. The urgency of the morning had reached its end, and in its place now stood quiet relief, shared between two strangers whose lives had intersected in the smallest yet most meaningful way. The woman stood there for a long moment, her arms wrapped tightly around the box as if letting go might somehow undo everything. Her eyes, brimming with tears, scanned the label once more as if to confirm that it was really there, that the moment wasn't just a cruel trick of hope. Then she looked back up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you so much," she said, and this time, the words carried more weight than he'd expected. They weren't just polite. They were raw, emotional, and steeped in genuine relief. "I was running out today." Those words hit him in the chest. Today. Not next week. Not soon. Today. The note had been no exaggeration. This wasn't an early delivery, it was a last chance. He imagined what might have happened had he not seen the note, or worse, chosen to ignore it. She might have waited all afternoon, her anxiety growing with each hour. Maybe she'd already skipped a dose or two, rationing what little she had left. He thought about the quiet desperation it must have taken to write that note in the first place, how she'd placed all her trust in a complete stranger and a system not known for flexibility. And he had made it. Just in time. "I'm glad I could get it to you," he replied gently, his voice steady but low, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace that had settled over the porch. He didn't need to say more. He didn't need to explain the route he'd rearranged, the delays he'd skipped, or the quiet pressure that had gripped him from the moment he read the note. She seemed to understand. In fact, her eyes told him everything. There was gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. Recognition. She knew he had gone out of his way. She knew he had chosen to care. For a moment, they stood there together in silence, two people who would likely never meet again, bound for just a moment by a shared sense of humanity. The world continued to move around them, birds sang, a breeze stirred the trees, a car passed in the distance, but on that small porch, time seemed to pause. The crisis had passed. The delivery had been made. But the impact of the moment lingered, more lasting than the package itself. He offered a small smile and tipped his cap, a quiet goodbye, then turned to head back down the steps. Behind him, the woman gently closed the door, holding the box as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He stepped off the porch slowly, his boots making soft thuds against the wooden steps, each one echoing faintly in the stillness of the cul-de-sac. The door behind him clicked shut with a gentle finality, and he paused for a moment at the bottom of the steps, letting the silence settle around him. The box was delivered. The urgency was over. But he didn't feel lighter. If anything, he felt full, filled with something deep and steady, the kind of feeling that didn't come often. It wasn't pride exactly. It was quieter than that. It was the simple, grounded peace that comes from doing the right thing, at the right time, for the right reason. As he walked back to the truck, the sun had shifted slightly in the sky, casting longer shadows across the sidewalk. Everything looked the same as it had when he arrived. The same houses, the same trees, the same breeze tugging gently at the leaves, but something inside him had changed. This wasn't just another completed delivery. It wasn't about metrics or scanned packages or being on time. It was about connection. For a brief moment in the middle of a routine workday, he had stepped into someone's life at the exact moment they needed help, and he'd been able to give it. He climbed into the driver's seat, the familiar creak of the suspension greeting him as the door closed. The yellow note still sat on the passenger seat where the box had been, fluttering slightly in the wind from the cracked window. He picked it up, turning it over once more in his hand. It was just a scrap of paper, really, something most people would toss without a second glance. But to him, it had been a call to action. A quiet request that carried all the weight of someone's hope. He folded it gently and tucked it into the sun visor above his head. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what the job could mean when you paid attention. Of what could happen when you listened not just with your ears, but with your heart. The engine rumbled to life, and he guided the truck slowly back onto the street, merging once again into the rhythm of his route. There were still packages to deliver, still stops to make, but the day already felt different. He wasn't just returning to his routine. He was carrying with him the quiet knowledge that sometimes, doing your job well means more than checking boxes or following orders. Sometimes, it means seeing a need and choosing to respond. And as he drove away from the little blue house, the weight in his chest shifted, not heavy, not burdensome, but solid. Steady. The weight of having made a difference.